applause, please. Save it for the end. Okay. Anyhow, when I talked to Mitch via email, he talked about, I gave him a brochure of different programs that I provide, and he picked Amos Elmaker and an artist by the name of Jacob Eichholz from Lancaster. So we're going to do those two in that order. And gentleman back there, you asked me about the house lights. Maybe if you turn the house lights just down a little bit, the screen would show up a little better. I thought it might be fine that way, but if you give us just a little bit of more dimness, please. More dimity, yeah. Oh, wonderful, thank you. Now it gives, also, if you get tired now, you can sleep better, okay? If I talk too long. Amos Elmaker, he did a lot of stuff in his time. By the way, I've had a number of requests tonight, but I'm going to talk anyhow, okay? Their study looked like, born at Walnut Bottom Farm, which was in Laycock Township, on not Valentine's Day, but Groundhog Day. And they say he saw his no, that was somebody else, never mind. Dad was Nathaniel Elmaker, mother Elizabeth Fellenbaum Elmaker. Elmaker, not that common a name in Lancaster County. Fellenbaum, more common. Anyhow, went to school in Lancaster. This is before what they called the Free School Act of Pennsylvania, which passed in 1834. This is before that, so in other words, his parents had to pay tuition for him to go to grade school and beyond. Graduated, though, eventually from Princeton University in 1805. His major there was the classics. Classic as in Shakespeare, as in the Greek classics particularly. And then he studied law in the office of a guy by the name of James Hopkins. Now, when you studied the law at that time, generally you were a gopher. You worked in the office and you would do things, whatever the boss told you to do, you would go for it. So he was a gopher for a while, learned some of the law. They'd have him read some of the stuff there. But eventually he went to the first law school in the United States. And it was called the Litchfield. It was in Litchfield, Connecticut. It was Litchfield Law School. And the person in charge, the teacher, was that man. His name was Tapping Reeve. And he looks like a happy soul, doesn't he? Yeah. It was the first school, as I said, in the United States to have a comprehensive legal curriculum. He completed his study in law in the office of Thomas Elder, then in Harrisburg, and completed, meaning now he worked as an assistant, as a researcher and all that kind of thing, completed his knowledge there, and then he fell in love with the boss's daughter. And so they get married, there she is, Mary Rachel. In 1816 they married. They had 6 children. And it says Franklin Unknown. Well, unknown wasn't his last name. We just don't know the year that he was born, okay? It could have been 1816, the year they got married, or it might have been after that. I don't know about you, but my family is really blessed. We've had a lot of 2 or 3 month pregnancies in my family. Anyhow, Nathaniel in 1817, Catherine in 1821, Elizabeth in 1823, Thomas in 1825, and Levi in 1836. Yeah, well, it's before television. At 22 years of age, he's appointed the Deputy Attorney General for Dauphin County. Now, Dauphin County, as you see there in a picture, hugging Lebanon County and just kind of northwest of Lancaster County. At one time, that was all one county. Lancaster County, when it was formed in 1728, was in fact much bigger than the county, and there was nothing to the west, no counties to the west at that point. So in other words, Lancaster County really continued the whole way to the Monongahela River. He served in the military during the War of 1812. And the word was out that the British were going to sail into the Chesapeake Bay. So they sent a troop down there to march the whole way from Lancaster to the Chesapeake Bay. With him, by the way, in that same troop was a young guy by the name of Buchanan. Also marched in the same way. They went down, they never saw any British, and they marched back again. That's as exciting as it got. During the War of 1812, his position was aide-de-camp to that gentleman, who's the Brigadier General John Forster, I guess he was the one that gave the commands to march forward and march backwards. While in that position, 1814, he's elected to the United States Congress, the 14th Congress at that time. You know, they name them every 2 years. It becomes the next number. Representing Lancaster, Dauphin, and Lebanon counties. But he said, you know, I'm really not interested. So he didn't serve. But he was elected. He was elected to a 2-year term in the state legislature, and he said, that I'll do. But I'm not going down to that crazy place in Washington, D.C. where politics. You know, politics come from those 2 Latin words, poly meaning many, and ticks meaning blood-sucking creatures. You know that, yeah. So he did that for 2 years, 1813, 1814. July of 15, he's appointed and commissioned president judge, meaning the boss judge. They have multiple judges. He's the president judge of the Judicial District, Pennsylvania, an area, again, that encompasses Dauphin County, now Lebanon County, and Schuylkill County. December 21, 1816, he resigned that to accept Governor Simon Snyder's appointment as Pennsylvania's Attorney General. And he liked being Attorney General. And you'll see that he continued in that for a while. Governor Snyder was the governor of Pennsylvania when Lancaster was still the capital of Pennsylvania. It was during Governor Snyder's term that we moved to this. They wanted water access. So they went along the river to this swampy area given to them by a guy named John Harris. Okay, and the least they could do is name it after him, Harrisburg. But anyway, he appointed him as Attorney General. 1818, the new governor, that man, Governor Finley, reappoints him, same position. 1821, he moves to Lancaster. He says, this politics is okay, but I've had enough of it. I want to practice law. So he opens up his law office at 42 North Duke Street. Now, 42 North Duke is right where the courthouse is right now. If you're coming down Duke Street toward King Street, about halfway down the block on the right-hand side is where his office was at that time. That's all courthouse now. So he's practicing law, and who does he have in his class? A number of people that came into some renown here in Pennsylvania. One of them, Thomas Henry Burroughs, who was at that time a resident from Strasburg, who in 1834 led the fight in Pennsylvania for what they called the Free School Act of Pennsylvania. Of course, we know just like a lunch, there's no such thing as a free one, okay? It's just how is it paid for? It's paid for by taxes. But the Governor Wolfe, the first Governor Wolfe, George Wolfe, said, if I'm elected governor of Pennsylvania, I will see that every child gets an education regardless of their ability to pay for it. And when he got elected, he turned the responsibility over to a legislator named Thomas Henry Burroughs, and Burroughs led the fight to get it passed. While in Lancaster, he and his family lived at East Orange Street between Shippen and Lime Street. So if you're familiar with the configuration of the city, you should know where that is. His neighbors included John Passmore, who was the mayor at that time. I don't have a picture of him, but I can tell you when he died, he weighed over 400 pounds. They couldn't fit him into any kind of hearse, so they did it on a wagon, just threw his coffin onto this wagon and took it to the cemetery. Another neighbor was Timothy Matlack. This man wrote the Declaration of Independence. What? I thought Thomas Jefferson did. Well, this was the scribe. When you see a picture of the Declaration of Independence, it's his handwriting. He's the guy that wrote it. And also, Christopher Marshall was a pharmacist, and he kept a diary about the American Revolution. One of the first diaries of the American Revolution, and yeah, he did that. Anyhow, 1823, he's one of the 9 original incorporators of the Pennsylvania Railroad. 3 years later, 1826, he and James Buchanan, 13 others, served as the original corporators of the Columbia, Lancaster, and Philadelphia Railroad. Railroads were big at that time, but not as big as they became after the Civil War. Then it went nuts with guys like Cornelius Vanderbilt and all those guys. Anyhow, while living in Lancaster in 1828, now the new governor, John Schulz, appoints Al Maker to his third term as Attorney General. I guess the law business wasn't working out as well as he wanted, maybe not as many clients as he wanted. But anyway, he agreed to go back. He completed that term in 1829. And he was the vice presidential candidate then, believe it or not, in 1832. Vice presidential candidate for the United States. Under what party? The Third Ticket Party. The first Third Ticket Party we ever had. The Anti-Masonic Party. The Masonic Party was started because there were people, that's the guy who was running for president, William Wirt. He was the presidential candidate. But a lot of the people in the first half of the 19th century believed that the Freemasons existed basically to get control of the country. And they felt it was a corrupt elitist organization. And so they said, we need a party that can fight against them. So they organized this party called the Anti-Masonic Party. And the Anti-Masonic Party was the first third party candidate in any election. They were also the first party to hold a national convention. And those are so exciting to watch, aren't they? Yeah, it's like watching paint dry. Two states where the Anti-Masonic Party did well, Pennsylvania and Vermont. However, Thaddeus Stevens was also a member, by the way, for a short time. He started off as a Whig, did a little bit with the Know Nothing Party. Remember the Know Nothing Party? Way in the back of your head, probably, you remember in high school they talked about the Know Nothing Party. They were the people that they had all these secrets that they didn't want publicized, and then people asked them, they would do a Sergeant Schultz from Hogan's Heroes, I know nothing, and that's how they got the name, okay? But then he became a Republican when the Republican Party was formed in the 1850s. Anyhow, 1832 National Convention, Anti-Masonic Party. They're nominated. The convention, by the way, is in Philadelphia. By the way, Philadelphia. I don't know. I follow the Supreme Court pretty much. There's a case that's going to get there. It's out of Philadelphia right now. I don't know if you've picked up on it. It's a custody battle over a little boy, a 10-year-old kid. And the judge has met with this kid, and he said, do you want to live with your dad? He said, no, my dad beats me. He said, well, do you want to live with your mother? He said, no, my mother beats me too. Well, who do you want to live with? I want to live with the Phillies. They don't beat anybody. You can't make stuff like that up. In the election that fall, they did win Vermont. They didn't win Pennsylvania, but they did get the electoral votes, a few electoral votes from Vermont. 1834, he was considered by the Whig Party to be a candidate for U.S. Senate. And now at that time, we didn't elect senators, okay? The state legislature appointed senators up until the 1900s. And they appointed whomever the party was in control. They, of course, appointed one of their own people. And he lost out to a young guy by the name of James Buchanan, okay, who looked like that at that time. Don't you like the tie? Yeah. Following that defeat, he retired from political life. He said, I've had enough of this politics stuff. So he's supposedly out of it. He was offered a number of public positions, twice offered an appointment to the Supreme Court of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Solicited to run for governor of Pennsylvania. Hey, we want you to run for governor of Pennsylvania, a group said to him. Sought by President Monroe at that time, James Monroe, to be the Secretary of War. We didn't call it defense that time. They sounded a little more aggressive. We called it Secretary of War. Twice nominated for the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And he said basically, thanks, but no thanks. I'm not interested in any of those. 1838, he was one of 10 persons responsible for the founding of the Lancaster Female Seminary, which was a well-respected school, but not a well-funded school. So it didn't survive very long. Eventually, the school district of Lancaster subsumed it, and it became part of that, ceased to exist as a separate entity. He died November 28, 1851, and he was interred in St. James Episcopal Church. That's the churchyard at St. James. And there's his stone there. Now, when I read the article in the Advertiser, it said that he's buried at the Elmaker homestead in the cemetery. Do you think they split him up? No. So I did some investigation. Amos Elmaker is buried in the cemetery at Elmaker Homestead, south of New Holland, and it would seem that that gravestone is proof of that statement. I don't know if you can make out, it says Amos Elmaker. But the death of Amos Elmaker, this Amos Elmaker, was 1875. Our Amos Elmaker was, 1878 rather, had died 27 years before that. This is actually his nephew, okay? He had a brother, interesting brother's name. Where is it here? Isaias. I never saw that name before, but that was his brother's son, Amos. That Amos didn't live all that long. But he and his wife, Sarah, he was born August 3rd, 1838, and died in 78, so he wasn't but 40 years old at the time. Comments, questions about Elmaker before we do Jacob Eichholz? Anybody have a song you want to sing or anything? Okay, Jacob Eichholz, probably my favorite Lancaster artist. Demuth, there's a lot said for Demuth, a lot of his great paintings and all that kind of stuff. I'm an Eichholz guy. That was a self-portrait he did. It's a self-portrait that he did of himself. Yeah. Born in Lancaster, November 2nd, 1776. Okay. Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. Thing that he was so happy about his entire life was, there are his parents, by the way, Leonard Eichholz and Mother Catherine, and he was so happy that he never lived under British rule. He was born when we were a free country at that time. The parents owned a thing called the Bull's Head Inn. If you come from the square in Lancaster, you come up South Queen Street to the square, turn right on King Street, go down there about half the block, Christian Street Alley comes through, okay? Right on the corner of Christian Street Alley on the right-hand side, on this side. It used to be the driveway you'd go into Watton Shan, okay? As you turned into Watton Shan parking lot, right there is where the Bull's Head Inn was. An architect talked to me about, they said they took the facade down on the Eichholz home there, and it was underneath, it was nothing but tin. I said, well, that doesn't surprise me a lot because, as you'll see, his first craft was he was a tin maker. So you'd expect it. There was what I was telling you. He was so proud that he and the new nation were born in the same year. And he never lived under British rule. 1787, parents enrolled him and his two brothers, George and John, in what they called the English School at Franklin College, operated by that guy, Gotthilf Henry Erastus Muhlenberg. He was the pastor for 35 years at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Lancaster. Muhlenberg was, this Muhlenberg. Altogether different story about that. Inaugural class, the very first class, English school. What do you think the purpose was? To teach them English. A lot of German people, and they didn't sprechen sie English, okay? So the purpose was that they would learn the English language. So that's where the parents sent them. It was located in a place at that time called the Brew House. Do you want to guess what they might have made there? These are Germans. Did I mention they were Germans? Yes, they made beer. But anyway, located in Mifflin Street between Queen and Duke is what, and that's what it looked like. Age 14, he's apprenticed to an uncle. Here we go with about the tinsmith. He was a coppersmith, and they don't start off, copper was very expensive at that time, so they started off teaching him how to do what he did on tin first. He became proficient at the craft, but he always maintained this love of art. And even as an apprentice, there were other apprentices there, and he used to draw rude sketches of the other apprentice. Now, rude sketches. You remember being 14? Not a nice time in our lives, really. It'd be fun to go back there again, knowing what you know now, of course. But rude sketches, you can imagine what rude sketches were by a 14-year-old at that time. But he did them on the walls of the shop with charcoal. 1800, now a coppersmith, he lives in Lancaster. And it must have been pretty good at his trade, because Steinman's hardware store, Frederick Steinman, who owned it at that time, employs him and his brother. They hire them to journeyman copper and tin workers. Steinman's hardware still looks like that. Of course, it's the press room now. And again, it's the press room. Press room closed, and now it's opening up again, or has opened up as the press room again. But when that closed as a hardware store in the 1960s, up until that time, it was the oldest continually operating hardware store in America, from 1744 to that time. While working at Steinman, it was a good job and everything, but they wanted to be on their own, so they opted to go out on their own. February 17, there was an ad in the Lancaster Intelligencer and Weekly Advertiser. It says, George and Jacob Eichhold's tin plate workers respectfully inform their friends and the public in general that they now have at their father's in East King Street a complete assortment of tinware, which they will dispose of by wholesale and retail at the most moderate prices. Orders from the county carefully attended to. And subnote, the highest price given for old pewter and lead. So you're going to kind of recycle the pewter and lead if somebody wants to sell it to them. April of 2003, he marries for the first time. Catherine Hetz Michael, widow with 2 children. Within 2 years now, he opens a business at a different location, East King Street. Again, a property that's basically owned by his father, a limestone house. And there he makes pots and kettles. But whenever he makes a pot or a kettle, he paints a little something on the side. A flower, a cat, you name it, just something little ornamental. Art kept calling him, kept calling and kept calling. And for a time, there was nobody home. But eventually he turns to it. That's his first wife, Catherine. He painted that. 1833, he painted that. 1808, now we're back 25 years before that. He had established himself as a coppersmith, but somewhat of an entrepreneur. In other words, he said, I can do just about anything. Really? Yeah. His daybook indicated he was a gilder, a glazier, a tin worker, wholesaler in raw materials, a sometimes real retailer of glass and china, and a painter of signs, banners, fire buckets, Masonic aprons, musical instruments, and portraits. Other than that, he didn't have anything he could do. When James Peale came to Lancaster, James Peale was probably one of the more famous artists at that time. Eichholz commissioned him to paint his portrait. And that's the portrait that James Peale did of him. By this time, Eichholz saw himself as a respectable member of the community, no longer an apprentice, no longer just a tinsmith. He could do it all, much more than a coppersmith. Spring of 1808, the following advertisement ran in the local newspapers for 3 consecutive weeks, and it said, Jacob Eichholz very respectfully informs the patrons of the fine arts that he executes profile and portrait painting on very moderate terms, East King Street, Lancaster, where specimens of his performance are to be seen on application by the public. So I can paint your portrait if you'd like, is what he's basically saying. Stop in and see some of my work. Well, Thomas Sully also was a very well-known artist at that time. 1809, we're still the capital. Lancaster's still the capital of Pennsylvania. So Sully is contracted to come and paint Governor Snyder's portrait. So he comes to Lancaster, and Eichholz says to him, you know, you're going to need a place to work. Why don't you use my area where I work? You can use it for free. And Sully quickly accepted. Eicholz's purpose was to get Sully to tell him a little bit of help, give him a little help, a little advice, a little teaching on how I can be a better artist. Okay? So Sully looks at his work, and he uses the word hideous to describe much of it. Wow. Talk about an arrow through the heart. Further, he advised Eicholz, don't leave the tin business. Stay there. Don't quit your day job, okay? That was too much. Eicholz couldn't handle that. He said, no, I want to be an artist. Sully says, okay, you want to be an artist? Go to Boston and be tutored by Gilbert Stuart. Now, most of you probably know that Gilbert Stuart is the one that does the famous George Washington portrait, okay, that used to hang in all the one-room schools and everywhere. That was Gilbert Stuart. So Gilbert Stuart, he contacts Gilbert Stuart, says, can I come and be one of your students? Gilbert Stuart says, let me think about it. Okay. But when you come, bring a copy of one of your more recent works. And he took a painting along, which I'll show you here in a bit. So Sully then comes back later after he's tutored in Boston, and he says he's surprised and gratified how much better Eicholz's work is. When he visited Stuart, he was supposed to take along a painting. He took along, I don't know how familiar you are with the name Biddle, B-I-D-D-L-E, but Biddle out of Philadelphia. They were very, very involved in the treasury of the United States and whole bunches of other things and several generations worth. He did a portrait of Charles Biddle, a prominent businessman. Whoops, wait a second. That was his portrait that he took along in 1809. So he paints the portraits of Gilbert Stuart painted the portraits of Eicholz while he was there. I could not find it. I would love to have found it to include, but I could not find it anywhere. When Eicholz comes back to Lancaster, he says, enough of the tin and copper business. I'm now an artist, and I'm going to devote my life to being an artist. His initial paintings were small profiles, mostly family members because they were always available, okay? Family members on wood panels, and they did profiles. Not like this, but like this. Why do you think that was? Much easier. You don't have to line up two eyes or two ears. You do it sideways, okay? So he painted profiles of other Lancastrians, like Leonard Eicholz, his dad, Catherine Eicholz, his second wife. Smart man, married, his first wife passed away, but the second wife he got with the same name. He's not going to accidentally call his second wife by his first wife's name. I meant you all along, dear. Yeah. And Andrew Ellicott. So anybody know who Andrew Ellicott was? No? Andrew Ellicott was a surveyor, and he was the Commonwealth surveyor, lived in Lancaster. You know, when Representative Smucker was State Senator Smucker, where his office was on the second block of North Prince Street, that old house there, that was the Ellicott mansion there, Ellicott home. Andrew Ellicott was the best surveyor and map maker in the United States at that time. And I'm digressing now, I know. Thomas Jefferson, when he was president in 1803, had an opportunity to buy some land from France. And Congress said, you can buy land as much as you can get, but don't spend more than $1 million on it. So Jefferson sent his envoy to France, a guy by the name of James Monroe, and said, buy as much as you can get, but don't pay more than $7 million for it. Monroe said, gotcha, Chief. He goes there and he spends $15 million for the Louisiana Purchase, which come out to about a penny and a half per square mile. Pretty good deal. But without Congress's authority, he did that. But that's another thing. And then he says, he contacts Andrew Ellicott. He says, I had these two guys that are going on an excursion to look at this land that we purchased. And I'd like you to go along and survey and map it, because you're the best. And he said, that's a great idea, Mr. President, but I'm too old. He really was old. He was 42. I have socks on today that are 42, okay? So he said, okay, I understand. Jefferson said, okay, I'll send my personal secretary to Lancaster. You train him to map and survey. His name's Meriwether Lewis, by the way. So Meriwether Lewis comes to Lancaster before he goes west, and he's trained to survey and to map by Andrew Ellicott, that man there. I'm done digressing now. We'll go back to, at 34 years old in 1810, he gambled that there were sufficient market out there to make portraits. Proved to be a good decision. He spent the next 30 years painting portraits of family members, neighbors, fellow citizens, friends, and all emerging from the middle class in Lancaster and Philadelphia at that time. The middle class was just being created about that time. Before that, you were either rich or you were poor. Nobody in that middle, nobody in the comfortable range. I'm not sure what that is, by the way, comfortable, but anyhow. So he wrote in his diary about portraits. He kept a daily diary. It said, every man is always present to himself. I know what I look like, in other words, and therefore little need of his own resemblance, nor can desire it, but for the sake of those whom he loves, and by whom he hopes to be remembered. The use of the art is a natural and unreasonable consequence of affection, and though like other human actions, it is often complicated with pride. Now, I know nobody in this room is prideful that you ever looked at a picture and said, well, that doesn't look like me. I have, unfortunately. And unfortunately, it probably does look like me. Anyhow, he was able to support his family as a full-time artist, but because he got patronage from wealthy families would come and ask him to do the thing, do paintings for them. The Coleman family. Robert Coleman was an industrialist. He was a matter of fact, Pennsylvania's first multimillionaire. He was an iron master, not an ironsmith. He didn't make things of iron. He owned the iron mines. He owned the quarries. He owned everything. If you've been to the Wolf Sanctuary, that was one of his mansions, okay? One of them. Colemanville, southern Lancaster County, named after Robert Coleman. Anyway, he had 18 members of his family, well, 18 portraits of his family. Some of them he did multiple times. Peter and James here. There's James. There's Peter. Notice he's still doing profiles in 1810. 1813, he moves from painting profiles, and he now does what they call a bust-length portrait. In other words, a full frontal, okay, of them. Wealthy ironsmith Robert Coleman commissioned him to do two. One of his wife, Anne, and one of himself. There's Anne, and there's Robert. Now, by the way, Anne's maiden name was Old. She was old when she was born. One of the early portraits that he completed in 1818 was the Reagan sisters. My wife and I love this painting. Matter of fact, we have one that hangs in our home right now. It favors, the girls favor our granddaughter, okay, when she was that age. Once established as a portrait painter, he began to travel to other cities because, you can only do, sooner or later, you're going to deplete the area around you. So he traveled to New Jersey, New York, Maryland, Kentucky, Delaware, in cities Trenton, Long Island, Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, Frederick, Annapolis, Baltimore, Hagerstown, Lexington, Dover. But traveling got old after a while. And he said, enough of this. I can't do all this traveling. So 1823, he moves his family to Philadelphia. New city, people that he hasn't painted, and his reputation is growing, and he thinks there he's going to be able to make a comfortable living, and he was able to make a comfortable living there. But many of the people that he painted were from Lancaster. They would go to Philadelphia to get their portrait painted because that's where this guy was that they had seen his work. Again, mostly upper middle class at that time, Lancastrians. One of them was Phoebe Cassidy Freeman, whose husband, if you know where Southern Market is, right across the street, there used to be the White Swan Bar, okay? Above that bar was a clinic where her husband was a doctor, and he would treat you for free unless your injury or illness was due to alcohol. Well, what was down on the first floor? A bar. What was on the corner across the street? Thaddeus Stevens' bar. So chances are some of them got injured because of alcohol. Anyway, Nathaniel Elmaker, the father of Amos, there he is. During that 9-year period in Philadelphia, he did over 200 portraits. Then he says, it's time to go home. Thomas Wolfe says you can't go home again. He wanted to do it anyhow. So he's gone home. He said, he wrote in his diary that he had been able again to remove to my native place, meaning Lancaster, with a decent competence and a mind still urging on for further improvement. I love this. He said, his need to improve. He said, it is a fire that will never quench. Wow. Upon his return to Lancaster, he lived in South Lime Street. That's his home there. That was the car no, that wasn't his car. But that's his home. I couldn't get the guy to move that car. But that's his home on South Lime Street. If you come out Church Street to the end and you turn on Lime, it's about the second or third house right there on the left-hand side. Back in Lancaster, he received many more commissions. As 40 from the Mayer family alone. George Mayer was a merchant, had a store on North Queen Street, and he had only one child who lived to maturity, and there she is, Serena Angelica. He also created several non-portrait paintings, one that hangs in St. James Episcopal Church called The Crucifixion. He also had a daughter, his daughter's Catherine, named after mother. First one or second one? We don't worry about that, okay? Had a daughter, Catherine, who married a guy by the name of Lindsay, and they moved to Philadelphia. And he was homesick for her, but she was homesick for Lancaster County. So he painted one called the Conestoga Creek, which it was, if you remember, before it was the Conestoga River, it was the Conestoga Creek. And he sent it to her. 1833. Now, I tried to figure out where he would have to be to take that picture. No, to paint that picture. And do I have any golfers in here? The fourth tee at Media Heights Golf Course. The trees weren't that big. Right now, you'd look out there, and to the left is where the new prison's going to be. Throughout his career, he frequently painted portraits of family members. Why? Because they were always available. And he experimented with new techniques. Below are portraits of two wives, Catherine Hatzmichael and Catherine Trissler Eichholz. Okay. He and his first wife had 4 children. Caroline died as an infant. Catherine Maria married Robert Lindsay. She's the one that moved to Philadelphia. Rubens Mayer died at age 30. Margaret Amelia married Emmanuel Demuth. And there they are. He and his second wife had 9 children. He painted the following children from his second marriage: Anna Maria, Benjamin West, Rebecca, Henry Clay, Robert Lindsay II, and Lavalin Barry. And that's Anna Maria. I'm guessing she's maybe about 14. I was a school superintendent for 15 years. And I always thought the meanest creature God ever created was an 8th grade girl. They don't even like themselves, okay? And that's kind of that look that I think she has. But I like her hair. There's Benjamin West Eichholz, named after the famous artist, of course, Benjamin West, who was a frequent visitor to Lancaster, by the way. Rebecca Trissler Eichholz, and the 3 boys: Henry Clay, Robert Lindsay, Lavalin Barry. He became ill in 1842, died in May 13 at the age of 66. During his 35 years, he painted over 800 portraits. None of them hideous. Youngest son Lavalin lived a short life. The portrait below was begun by Eichholz in 1842, just before he died, and he never finished it. But after his death, his friend John Nagel completed it and wrote on the back of the painting, "Original head painted by Jacob Eichholz of his son, dress and background by John Nagel, 1850. He was originally interred in the cemetery at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church on South Duke Street when they had a cemetery there. But they decided sometime in the late 19th century that they were going to build another building there. So they had all the bodies exhumed and moved down to Woodward Hill, down to the South Queen Street cemetery. So his grave was moved to there. And that's the stone, his stone right there that you see in the middle. I made it look better than it does. It was all covered with weeds, and it was just not taken care of. And I felt bad for him. Comments, questions about either one of the people today? Please, sir.
We have a painting hanging in the museum in New Holland.
Uh-huh.
It was donated by E.C. Diller. It's a painting of Elizabeth Diller done in the 1820s. When it was donated, we were told it was by Bass Otis, but after reading a lot of the information about the prominent citizens of New Holland, it was usually Jacob Eichholz that did the paintings. Is there anybody that you work with, or would you be able to help us identify the artist?
Unfortunately, I don't have that kind of knowledge, but I always tell you where to go, okay? The National Museum of Art in Washington, D.C. could be contacted. I think they could probably help you a lot. Yeah, most of his work, most of those 400 plus, are in private collections. There's a bunch of them at, what's the Long Community, Long Home, out off of Oregon Pike. They have like 4 or 5 in a conference room out there.
I read somewhere that a portrait painter, you can often tell who it is by the way they painted the hands. And so
Yeah.
her hands are painted on this.
Okay, yeah. I'd start there. Okay?
Thank you.
Sure. Anything else, anybody? Sir?
Realizing that his tinware was made for everyday use, is there any existing articles that he painted?
I'm sorry, are there any existing?
Are there any existing pots and pans that he?
Oh, the existing pots and pans, and it's a great question. I don't know. I haven't seen any, but that doesn't mean anything. There could be some. Yeah, little flower on the side, or a little dog or a cat or something was what I understand that he did. But yeah, I haven't come across them if they are. And probably with the materials that he used, they probably weren't preserved, and they probably faded away. Yeah. So I would be surprised if there were, but I don't know of any. Could be. Anything else? You've been a very... Oh, sir.
Where can his works be seen by the public?
As I said, most of them are in private collections. I know that there's some in the National Museum of Art in Washington, D.C. That's why I suggested this gentleman to start with them. The long home there on Oregon Pike, as I said, in the conference room, there are 3 or 4, 5 maybe of those there. Judge Long is one of the ones he did. Judge Long, you remember Long's Park, of course, in Lancaster, you Lancastrians. Long's Park in Lancaster was named after the Long family. Judge Long had a maiden daughter who never married, and he was worried about what would happen when he passed away. So he built her little house. Today we call it the Hamilton Club in Lancaster, a little something they threw together. When she passed away, she gave a lot of land to the city, including Long's Park. But so he's one of the paintings out there, and I'm sure you could go into Long and see some in the Long home there in their conference room to see some of them. They're really cool. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Just observed there is such a book as The Worlds of Jacob Iseholt's Portrait Picture for the Early Republic.
I have it here.
It's 25 bucks on Amazon.
It looks like this. I have one at home too. It's a great book, isn't it? Yes, sir.
Yes, it is.
Yes, sir. Anything else? You've been a very patient audience. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here with you tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Frick. Thank you for coming, everybody. See you in September.